This is the Haulin Assets podcast, where we'll show you how to go from employee truck driver to savvy business owner. And we'll do it together because we're starting our own trucking company, Haulin Assets, so you'll get a front row seat through the whole process. Together with some experts in the field, we'll teach you how to set up a business, buy a truck, get your DOT and MC numbers, get insurance, and a lot more. Thanks for joining us. Welcome, everybody, to Haulin Assets. This is episode number 19. I am Craig, your host, and over there,
Chris.
Chris, welcome back in studio once again.
It's good to be back, in studio.
You know, I'm kind of torn because it's always, I feel like the episodes are generally better. It's nice when we can have an actual face-to-face conversation when you're here in the studio. But on the other hand, I love chatting with you while you're out on the road. It's really cool.
If it makes you feel better, unless you count pulling my car into the garage, I haven't been home.
Oh, okay.
In 2 weeks.
Oh, there you go.
So I literally...
So you saw me before you saw your wife?
No, I saw her. I gave her a hug. I put my two older kids in the car, took them to their piano lessons, and then drove straight here.
Okay, well, that does make me feel better. All right, so for today's episode, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I teased this on episode 18, but in this one, we're going to be drawing a little bit from your military experience to glean some business lessons here. Now, you have served with the National Guard here in Utah for how many years now?
23.
23 years?
Just completed 23 years a couple months ago.
Wow, that's a lot.
Makes me feel like an old man.
Well, yeah.
I guess I kind of am an old man.
Yeah. Okay, so before we get to that stuff, of course, as is tradition, I got to ask you, how are things out on the road? Anything you want to talk about?
It's good, yeah. And I had something crazy happen to me in the last week.
Okay.
So I'd pulled into a shipper and I wanted to burn my 10-hour clock before I picked up my load. So I got there pretty early. They had overnight parking. I was supposed to pick up at, I think, like 8 o'clock in the morning. So I get there early. I'm parked in their parking lot and I'm sleeping. At 2:30 in the morning, all of a sudden there's this big, huge, loud bang. I mean, just super loud. Like I'm thinking, was that a tire that blew? That was like even too loud for a tire. So I get out of my truck and I look down the driver's side. I go walk down. There's no blown tires on the driver's side. Then I walk around the front of the truck, and right on the other side of my truck is a guy that had one of the actual shippers, one of their own trucks. He had pulled into the lot and his back wheel on the trailer had been locked up, and who knows how long he'd been driving it with it locked up, and it had just started on fire. Oh. And the tire had just blown. I mean, it was loud. It blew. And people start running over, and 5 fire extinguishers later, you still can't get the fire. I mean, it was so hot. Rubber. Yeah. The tire's burning, the metal's starting to melt, and the fire's starting to get bigger, and you can't get it out. Obviously calling the fire department at this point. And I help them. I'm like, we probably ought to disconnect your truck from the trailer in case this thing really gets crazy. So I help them disconnect the truck from the trailer. And to make a long story short, it burned the whole back of the trailer. No way. A big hole on one side, like all the way through the trailer. I'll have to post a picture too on. You got
a picture?
Yeah. On Facebook and on maybe in the show notes for this episode. But yeah, it was crazy. The fire department came and put the thing out.
Holy smokes. So is there anything that he could have done to prevent that? You said a tire locked up. I mean,
I don't know. It's hard to say because he was pulling a full load. I mean, it was a heavy full load. And, if a brake locks up like that, it's kind of hard to tell. Plus it was pitch black. It was 2:30 in the morning, and it's hard to see, kind of everything that's going on in great detail, clear back, 53 feet back.
Sure.
So it was a reefer load, and he was hauling dairy milk. So, the cat got warm milk that day. It was all over the parking lot.
That's amazing. Now I demand to see pictures of this one.
Yeah, I'll have to. They're pretty good.
And speaking of pictures, I want to remind everybody about the Facebook page. Go and check out the Facebook page. That's where a lot of these photos get posted when there's something interesting that happens. But one of the things that I saw recently is that we posted some photos of your training.
Yeah.
Out in the desert. So how's that for a transition, Chris?
It is a good transition.
You were out in the desert doing training for the National Guard. You snapped some great photos of your, what do you call it, unit?
My unit, doing our 2-week annual training.
And so you wanted to, now that you're fresh off that, well, it's been a couple weeks now, but all of these military things are fresh on your mind, and you wanted to use that to talk a little bit about a business principle that you think would be helpful.
Yeah. So I when I was much younger, or fairly early on in my military
40.
career. No, I am 41.
I'm kidding.
So yeah, 1 year ago. No, I wouldn't have done this 1 year ago. Back when it was 17 years ago. I went through a school. It's called the Sapper Leader Course, and it's essentially the same, similar to Ranger School, but for engineers. And
when keep telling yourself that all the former Rangers listening,
they're like, no, it's actually a pretty big, it's a pretty interesting topic of conversation between Rangers and Sappers. Which one's harder? Sapper School is like half the length of Ranger School, and neither of them are easy. We'll put it that way.
Okay.
Anyway, one of the big things that you do, and this is part of the Ranger Handbook, it teaches a lot about this, is when you're out patrolling, so you're doing foot patrols. If you stop for the night, you do what's called, you set up a patrol base. So when you set up a patrol base, you have what are called priorities of work. And the priorities of work are basically, okay, these are the most important things, and this is the order that we do things. So if you look in the Ranger Handbook, it's going to always say that when you set up a patrol base, your first priority of work is going to be to establish security. So you essentially, you set up a 360-degree perimeter, weapons pointing out, and everybody's got kind of their sector of fire that they're responsible for. They're responsible for. And then once you've got that done, then you kind of keep improving your fighting position. So you'll start to dig a foxhole, or you'll camouflage your fighting position. That's kind of going down your priorities of work. So those are the first things you do. You don't come into the patrol base and then rack out and go to sleep, or you don't come in the patrol base and start eating dinner. You take care of the things that are the most important things first. So obviously, when you're out on a patrol, establishing that security and protecting yourselves, that's the first priority of work. So then once you get down that, then you go typically into weapons maintenance. So you'll clean your weapon or do whatever you need to make sure your weapon's working and functioning well. Then you might start going into like the personal hygiene, maybe changing your socks, cleaning up a little bit, eating dinner, getting a drink, and then maybe finally next you might get some shut-eye, kind of rotate. So, you're in a fighting position with a battle buddy, one of you sleeps while the other one maintains security.
Okay. All right.
So those are your priority work, the order that you do things.
Makes sense.
And it's important. You want to do those important things first.
And now you're about to tie this into business. And usually when you have these metaphors or these case studies that you talk about, it's easy for me to see, okay, this makes a lot of sense with, a business owner and how this applies. This one is a little more opaque to me. I mean, I think I can maybe draw a lesson or two, but I am curious where you're going to go with this.
So I think there's priorities of work in two categories. So when I'm out on the road, I use these, I stop driving for typically one of two reasons. You have to because you've got to have your 10-hour break. So that's one of the big reasons that you stop for, and then you're stopped for 10 hours. And then the second reason is because you're at a shipper or receiver. And so you stop, you get backed into a door, and you're essentially just waiting to get either loaded or unloaded. So we're going to talk about priorities of work. They're a little bit different, I feel like, in each one of those categories.
Okay.
And you want to do the things that are, obviously the most important first.
Okay. So where do we start?
So let's start with the 10-hour break. And I feel like, kind of like we talked about with the military, security is number one, then your weapon. So taking care of your equipment. I think really kind of that taking care of your equipment, that truck and or that trailer are really the most important things. Those things, they have to be working well. So first priority work when you're stopped at your 10-hour break is to check on your equipment, make sure everything's good with it. So that might mean putting air in tires or
checking fuel levels.
Checking fuel levers, and in your reefer. That's actually typically one of the first things that I'll do is you definitely want to stay on top of that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Then once you've got that done, and you may not have, other than checking the fuel in your reefer, if your truck doesn't have any issues, you may not necessarily need to do a whole lot there. But then the next thing is finding a load. Like if you don't have your follow-on load yet and you're not using a dispatcher, that might be your next priority of work is finding a load. And you typically, in my opinion, you don't want to be using more than like 30 to 60 minutes in those first categories.
each.
Eat.
Or,
Well, I'd say total 30 minutes to an hour for both of those items.
Okay.
And then after that, then you might have a little bit of personal time for an hour or two. And then I think one of the really most important priorities after that is sleep. And I kind of found that I ran into problems with this, like especially right at the very beginning when I really didn't have those, okay, these are my habits, these are my priorities of work. I remember, within the first week or two of being out on the road for the very first time, I'd stop for my 10-hour break and I go and watch a movie or respond to some emails or just do something, and before I know it, 6 hours has passed and
you haven't gone to sleep.
I haven't gone to sleep yet, and I've got to start driving again in 4 hours. And that's just not a good thing. You need more than 4 hours of sleep. So I've gotten really disciplined. So I've got those important priorities of work that I feel like I need to do before I go to sleep. But then I don't do any of the other crap. Like I typically don't respond to emails. I don't watch a show or anything like that. If I'm within 8 hours of having to start again, I go to sleep. Basically no matter what's going on.
Right.
And that way I get that sleep, because you've got to have it. Or you're not going to be safe.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. So does that wrap up that category? Now we're back to driving, or is there something else that comes after you wake up?
I think when you wake up, then you kind of have to prep for the day. So a lot of times what I'll do, and sometimes I'll do this before I go to sleep too, is determine where the route I'm going to take if I don't already know it. But even more importantly than that, reaching back to a few episodes ago, is determining where you're going to fuel. Because you want to make sure you're buying the cheapest fuel along your route. And so there's, doing that research to determine, I've got a half a tank of fuel, so I'm probably going to need to, I can maybe go 400 more miles before I'm going to need to stop for fuel. So where in that 400 miles is my cheapest fuel?
Okay.
Then from there you might sweep out your trailer or do something else till it's time to hit the road and do your pre-trip and be on your way. So that kind of, for the most part, handles your 10-hour break.
Okay. And so now that's our first category, is that 10-hour break. Let's move into the next one.
So the next one, when you're stopped at a shipper or receiver, I feel like obviously the quickest thing you want to do is get back into that door, get your trailer set so that the lumpers that charge $1 bajillion to unload, 4 pallets can get their thing going. And so they're not waiting on you. So that time can pass and hopefully get out of there sooner rather than later. So obviously get that done first. And then once you've got that, kind of, again, go back into the truck and trailer. If there's anything that needs to be handled with those, take care of those. And then, finding your loads, you might have some work you need to do on the business, work on the accounting or some other things like that, just while you're waiting to be unloaded, and then relax. Maybe you drove for 6 hours, you've hit the shipper, and you want to take a 2-hour nap because you're going to go pick up another load and hopefully drive another 3 or 4 hours. You want to be fresh for it.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And so both of these are kind of downtime or potential downtime while you're on the road. I assume there is no such order when you're driving. It is just drive, right?
It's basically just drive. Yeah.
See how many audiobooks you can get through.
Yeah. Listen to your audiobooks, your podcast, listen to this podcast. That should probably be really high on that priority work, right? Yeah. The Haulin Assets podcast.
That's going straight in the show notes.
Yeah. So that, and you can, if you feel like you can safely, which I feel like you do, you use a hand-free device. Siri is really helpful. You can make phone calls. You don't have to touch your phone. You can do all that stuff. Answer phone calls, make phone calls.
He said, knowing the police were listening closely to this episode.
Without using hands.
No, yeah. That's safety first is
safety
a
first.
real thing.
It absolutely is.
Okay, so does this principle extend to anything else, or is that where you wanted to go with this?
That's pretty much where I want to go with it. It's just establishing those habits and kind of getting in those routines, because those are the things that are going to make you successful. And I see a lot of people, it seems like a simple thing and a little thing that doesn't really make that big of an impact, but I think in the long run, it really does make a big impact, because, if you're dinking around doing a less important thing and you don't get to finding a load, or you don't spend the amount of time that you need to on finding a load, you're going to end up with a desperate and contracting a crappy load that you're not going to make good money on.
No,
so you need to get those things done first. Stephen Covey, I'm pretty sure it was Stephen Covey, did a really cool analogy where he fills a jar up with big rocks, then little rocks, then like sand, and then water, talking about prioritizing. If you've got you can see that, watch that on YouTube. But if you search that and look at that, I really think those priorities and doing the important things first, make sure you get those knocked out before you do the less important things is a really good habit to be in life, in trucking or anywhere.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, actually, I've noticed a similar thing for myself where these habits are extremely important when we talk about, I think of it in terms of scripts. When we are in a certain situation, we have a certain script and we have to memorize that script. And so what I mean is, it could be something as simple as you go to a restaurant, you know the script. They seat you, then they give you your menus, you get your drinks, and then you order appetizers, and on, right? You've got the script, and that helps you get through it. But in a professional context, I've noticed this for myself, where if I want to be as productive as possible, then I need to develop and stick to a certain script for certain situations. If I'm sitting at my desk, I am doing X, checking things off my list. If I go to a meeting, I need to prep with this script, right? I'm going down this checklist. And it's kind of a similar thing to what you're talking about. I think that we're all familiar with this idea in various places in our lives and can understand the utility in something like this. And so for a business owner who has to manage not only, his or her own employee performance, but the business as a whole, this is going to be doubly important. To manage the business as well as yourself, right?
It certainly is. You've got to knock out those important things first, and a lot of the times those aren't necessarily the funnest and most sexy things to do. And so, as human beings, it's in our nature to try to do the things that are easy and the things that are fun first.
To be lazy.
Yes. Yeah, we all do that, and it's avoiding the temptation to do that. It's like with the priorities of work, when you set up a patrol base, you may have just done a 10-mile movement. You're tired as can be. You're hungry and you're thirsty, and the temptation is to eat and sleep. But you're going to get into a world of hurt if you get attacked and you haven't set up proper security, or you get attacked and you haven't cleaned your weapon and your weapon jams. Those are the important and critical things. You've got to get those done first, because they're going to have the biggest either positive or negative impact in your life. Not the eating and sleeping, those are important things too, but they can wait. They're not going to be catastrophic if you have to wait an extra hour to eat or sleep. You're going to survive. But if you haven't cleaned your weapon, or if you haven't set up security and you get attacked, that in the military, that can be the difference between life and death.
Right. Or in this case, it's the difference between a business that thrives and one that goes under.
Exactly.
Quick.
Yep.
All right. Very good. Chris, shall we wrap this one up? It's a pretty quick, easy discussion, I think.
I think it is, but we have a question, don't we?
Oh my gosh. Lest I forget. Thank you for reminding me. We actually got a question. I noticed this in the show notes for episode 17. And this is, so believe it or not, we do check those. So you can go to haulinassetsllc.com. Go to the show notes there and leave a comment, and we will do our best to address those either as a reply to those comments, or in this case, we want to talk directly to that person here on the show. So in this case, we have Dean, who left us a very kind note. We appreciate that, Dean. Glad you like the podcast. Says his wife and he are teaming for a company, strongly considering their own truck. He says, I notice on the P&L. So I should break here and say, go check out the show notes for episode 17. If you don't remember, we talked about the profit and loss statement on that. And he says, I noticed on the P&L, there is no line item for truck payment, but there is for interest paid. Is the truck figured differently than other expenses since it's a hard asset? Oh, that's an insightful question.
Dean he's the man. He obviously knows what he's talking about to a great degree there. That's a very good, well thought out question.
So what's the answer, Chris?
The answer is you're right. There's not a line item for a truck payment. And the reason is because that truck payment's kind of divided into two categories. You have the interest piece of it, and you have the principal payment piece of it. So when you enter that truck payment into an accounting system, you're gonna enter those two different pieces. You're going to enter the interest expense. And so that is shown on the line item of the profit and loss statement. But the principal piece is actually part of your profit. And so it doesn't really show per se in the right into P&L in itself. It is kind of in there mixed in the profit piece, but it doesn't show up in its own line item. And the reason behind that is because it's not a true expense. The principal piece is not an expense. Like the profit and loss is your income and your expenses, and the principal payment on the truck is not an expense.
Interesting. Wow, that sounds like wizardry to me, but I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
and so what you're talking about there too is another important report that a lot of companies use is your statement of cash flow. And that's literally the cash coming in of the business and the cash going out. And so your truck payment will show up on something like that because that is, that principal payment is cash going out. But I think kind of for our intents and purposes right here, because your P&L in this type of business is going to be, other than a few exceptions like the truck payment, is going to be pretty similar to your cash flow statement.
Okay.
We're not gonna go so much into the cash flow statements.
Okay. Well, yeah, maybe in a future advanced episode. I don't know.
Yeah.
But for today, we'll leave that one there. Dean, that was an excellent question.
Good question, and there's a lot of opportunity for team drivers. You can make teams can make a lot of money. They can do really well. So I think once you feel comfortable, once you feel like you've got that set up, teams can really do well in the trucking world.
Well, good luck to Dean and his wife. Hope everything goes well. And I hope you do go and get your own truck and get started on that. Hopefully we've not only inspired you to do that, but given you all the tools necessary to do that. And we'll continue to do that in future episodes. So we will leave it there for now and look forward to episode 20. I hope you stick around for that. Make sure that you are subscribed. And the best thing that you can do for us if you enjoy what we do is refer us to anybody who this might be helpful for. So if you've got other buddies who are out on the road thinking about pulling the trigger on that owner-operator thing, let them know Haulin Assets is there, and we would greatly appreciate that vote of confidence from you.
And also, I keep forgetting to ask this, but we would love to have some reviews. Thanks for everybody that has given us a review, but continue to give us reviews and put some comments in with your reviews too. Tell us what you like about it, what you don't like about it, or something that you'd like to hear that we haven't talked about yet, and we will certainly address it.
Okay, great. Well, I will see you then, Chris. Have a good week.
You too.